Hello everyone, we are here with Ian MacDougall with the Virginia Piedmont Heritage Area Association, and we are going to be talking about the prisoner of wars in the American Revolution. This is a part of our monthly series, the TBL Research Rabbit Holes, where we ask patrons or staff members or friends like Ian about interesting tidbits that they found while researching at the library. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to him.
Great. So as Anna said, my research has been recently on prisoners of war during the American Revolution, particularly here in our community. And this is a really kind of interesting place during the American Revolution because we're in between two major fronts of war. So on the coast of America, we have the American Revolution being fought along the coasts of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, eventually down into Virginia, the Carolinas. And so, a lot of the routes of travel that we might take during peacetime are largely interrupted by that. A lot of our trade is interrupted by that. In the West, in the frontier, we have a lot of fighting going on between Native American nations allied with the British government and their Loyalist allies, so Americans that have chosen to stay sided with Britain. Which creates kind of another warring front. So we've got a war going on in the East, we've got a war going on in the West, and we're kind of smack dab in between. And so you're going to see this explosion of movement during the American Revolution up through our area here in Loudoun County, over into Fairfax, Alexandria, crossing the Potomac each way as trade, soldiers, and eventually prisoners of war are going to make their way to and from their destinations. So, we have a few big events during the American Revolution which are going to see prisoners of war brought through Loudoun County. And those are the bigger ones that we know of. Usually when we talk about the American Revolution, we think of two major victories. We've got the Battle of Saratoga in October of 1777, and we have the Siege of Yorktown in 1781. So these are two huge victories for the American government, and two big times in which you're going to see thousands of British, German, and American Loyalist prisoners of war brought through this area. They're making their travel across places like Nolan's Ferry, and then into Loudoun County, going down modern Route 15, what was then known as the Carolina Road, as they made their way to places like the Shenandoah Valley. But one thing I found in my research that was much earlier than this was a very small episode in 1776. Before we even declare ourselves independent, there's a large group of prisoners of war. Nothing to the scale of Saratoga or Yorktown, but it's an interesting episode that the Balch really helped me explore some of that research. And this all starts in the spring of 1776. So in the spring of that year, the British Army is recruiting more and more soldiers to come over to America to put down the rebellion. And they're going to raise a regiment of Highland soldiers from the Highlands of Scotland. Many of these men, Gaelic speaking, not English, not very well socialized in English society, many of them. So it's kind of a different breed of soldier, but fierce warriors nonetheless. And they board a series of transports bound for America. And during their voyage across the Atlantic, the ships are going to be separated in a heavy storm. Now, some of the ships are armed with weapons and ammunition. Other ships are filled with soldiers. So that means the soldiers that are on those ships do not have the weapons that they need if they should be attacked by, say, American privateers, which then will happen after the ships are separated. So an American officer named Nicholas Biddle with a fleet of American ships will surround two of the prisoner transports, the Oxford and the Crawford, and will surround them, intending to take them back to Rhode Island as a prize of war. And there's about 200 of these Highland soldiers aboard these ships at that time. Now, as Nicholas Biddle is taking these ships back to Rhode Island, another storm hits, separating the ships yet again. And so Nicholas Biddle returns to Rhode Island without his prize. Now, the Highlanders will then overtake the crew and force them to sail them to Virginia. They were originally intending to sail to Boston, but they learned from their captured crew that Boston had fallen, the British had evacuated, and not knowing where the British Army might be, they decided to sail down to Virginia. Because they knew the royal governor here, Lord Dunmore, was holding out at the coast looking for British reinforcements. So they sail down to Virginia and they find themselves in the Capes. And as they enter the Chesapeake Bay, they're going to be ushered on shore by a group of armed men, thinking, of course, that these are Dunmore's men. They ride on shore and realize that they are not indeed Loyalists fighting for Dunmore, but rather soldiers of the fledgling Commonwealth of Virginia, which will form later that year. So now we've got these prisoners of war, 200 in all, and the American government here in Virginia doesn't quite know what to do with them. So they are kind of debating back and forth, and as I'm reading about this story, I'm trying to figure out what is our local context. How does Loudon play a role in this? And very early on in the arguments, one of our prominent citizens here, a man named Levin Powell, later the founder of Middleburg, is going to write a letter to our Virginia government here. And we found, using a computer here at the Balch Library, that original letter. And in that letter, he writes to the government saying, hey, why don't we take those Highland prisoners and we force them to work on my farm here in Loudoun County? Which the government is not a big fan of. However, it does cause them to think, we have no plan for prisoners of war in Virginia. The Congress has really given Virginia no suggestions as to what to do. And so the Virginia government ends up deciding to break up those prisoners into smaller groups of about a dozen and send them out to the western counties of Virginia. And while I was here at the Balch researching, I was taking a look through the Tyler's Quarter magazine, and we actually have an original list that was published by the government, reprinted much later, where you can actually see not only where these soldiers are going, but you can see the names of every single Highland prisoner and where they go. So you can see here there's about a dozen prisoners that are going to be sent to Loudoun County. You can see they're also going to Goochland, to Frederick, to Fauquier, basically everywhere in these western counties where the war, as we said earlier, isn't being fought. So now that I had those names and wanted to learn a little bit more about what their experience was like, I turned to some of our prominent citizens that would be experiencing the war. And one of the best resources we have that the Balch has here to learn a little bit about what life was like maybe here in Leesburg, here in Loudoun County, is a prominent Loyalist named Nicholas Cresswell. Nicholas Cresswell writes a diary of his experiences during the American Revolution. And while he's traveling between Loudoun and Alexandria, he actually talks a little bit about what is happening here with some of those prisoners. So the prisoners are sent to Loudoun County here, most likely at the Leesburg Courthouse, where they're being housed in most of the other counties, Alexandria as well. And we look in his diary here, and Nicholas Cresswell witnesses a group of Highlanders being. There's an attempt of the Americans to recruit them into the American Army. And he's going to witness that a sergeant of those Highland troops is going to prevent a soldier from leaving the POWs to join the American Army. And he says this, he says, I saw a Highlander, a soldier in the 71st Regiment, now a prisoner of here, whipped by his comrades for enlisting into rebel service. He's the only one out of 200 and odd who has been prisoners here in this colony that has enlisted into their service. His fellow prisoners held a court-martial over him, a sergeant being the highest officer present, and condemned the poor wretch to receive 1,500 lashes with a switch upon his bare back, 100 every day until the number was complete. So that's one experience of many of some of these poor Highland prisoners that are going to be kept here. What I find to be most fascinating is that they arrive here in June of 1776. Now, we all know what happens in July. We become independent. We declare ourselves independent. And the words of the Declaration of Independence are going to be read off the steps of the Leesburg Courthouse here in Loudoun County in August. And you can only imagine if, what those Highlanders must have been thinking as they saw this new country form right around them in the town center. But it's a fantastic story and one that really helps to understand some of the community here in Leesburg, here in Loudoun County. And the Balch Library has a lot of really wonderful resources to learn more about this. And that's not the only prisoner of war story that we have here. That's a little rabbit hole that I went down, but we've also got, like I said, the battles of Saratoga, the battles of Yorktown, which you're going to see thousands of prisoners here. And in some of these cases, prisoners are actually going to end up staying here in Loudoun County to live. Many of these German Hessian soldiers are going to come down through the Carolina Road, and they're going to encounter places like modern-day Lovettsville, what they call the German settlement. And they're going to meet all these German community members who speak their language, who have families, who have farms, and many of them are going to desert German service and begin new lives here. And if you're interested in learning more about that, we have a few other resources here at the Balch where you can learn about the German soldiers, where they lived, what churches they attended, what regiments they were in, and get a better idea for how they would fit into the German community here in Loudoun.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Ian, for sharing that story.
Thanks so much.